This is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 10 Pro. It retails at $329 and it was released on March the 24th, 2021. It's about 193 grams, so it's not actually too heavy. And also it has Gorilla Glass on the front, Gorilla Glass 5, which I think was released in 2016, as well as Gorilla Glass 5 on the back. It's rocking Android 11 with a MIUI 12 skin. It's rocking a Qualcomm 732G chipset, and it's got an octa-core CPU with two 2.3 GHz Cairo 470 Gold processors, as well as six 1.8 GHz Cairo 470 Silver processors. The GPU is an Adreno 618, so in summary the spec's pretty good for a mid-range phone. It's enough to do everything you want it to do in any case. The model I've got right here has got 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of hard drive space at UFS 2.2. So it's ultra fast and it's definitely plenty of capacity for me. On the back you've got a quad camera setup, so that's a 108 megapixel wide camera, as well as an ultra wide camera at 8 megapixels. And then you've got your depth and macro sensor cameras in the middle. Macro is a 5 megapixel camera and the depth sensor is 2 megapixels. You also have a selfie camera on the front in this little notch here, which is 16 megapixels with an f number of 2.8. The screen itself is a 1080 by 2400 screen. The display itself is a 120 Hz AMOLED screen with 450 nits. So 120 Hz is awesome. Anything above 90 is super smooth. And 450 nits, if you're not aware of what a nit is, it's a luminance measure, and basically anything above 300 is good and anything above 500 is super amazing. So 450 for a mid-range phone is really quite something to brag about. The loudspeakers are super awesome. You have a output on this side, which I don't think is quite in focus, but you also have an output on this side as well. My apologies for the focus here, but you have sound coming out of both sides of the camera, and the sound is awesome for something at this price. You've also got a headphone jack, which again, I don't know if you can see that too well with the focus, but that's useful if you don't have any Bluetooth earphones. And we have a USB-C jack for charging. On the point of charging, this phone will charge up to 59% within 30 minutes and up to 100% in 74 minutes. So it's pretty quick. And actually, on the topic of things, what you get in the box is a 33 watt charger. And that 33 watt charger comes in the box, and that's going to charge your phone within well under an hour and a half. The battery in the phone is a 5200 milliamp hour battery, which is definitely a good thing. And in the box also they give you a transparent case, which is quite handy. There was a cover here for the charging, which I've actually cut off because it was becoming increasingly unusable to try and charge my phone. I had to keep plucking this off and it was actually getting quite annoying. So I just cut it off and it works fine. My worry with these cases is they eventually start to go yellow. I don't know, we'll see what happens with this one, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of other alternatives on the market if that starts to happen. Another cool thing I wanted to mention about this phone was the fingerprint reader. I had a Google Pixel 3 XL before, and the fingerprint reader was right here on the back. With this, you've got the fingerprint reader on the lock button. So if I lock this phone and then I just touch it, it opens it, unlocks it, and I can use it for unlocking other functions I want to unlock on various apps. It's really amazing to see something this advanced on such a mid-ranged phone. So super impressed with that. And essentially this is my stopgap phone. My other phone, my Google Pixel, got destroyed, and I'm trying to get a Google Pixel in Vietnam. Not too easy. So this was my stopgap phone, and so far I'm super impressed, very impressed so far. The MIUI 12 skin is actually quite impressive. I used to own a Xiaomi about 4 years ago, and really they've done a lot of work and it's moved on by leaps and bounds. You can see here you've got your storage represented as a tank of water, which will react to the movement of the phone. and it gives you all sorts of things like the MIUI version, Android version, etc, etc, and then backup and restore. It's the sort of things you're going to see on any Android phone, but with their unique skin. It's also dual SIM, so that's pretty handy, especially for me, considering I do not currently live in my home country and I have 2 SIM cards, which I really need quite a lot. Bluetooth connection sharing, you can connect any of your Xiaomi devices, as well as a Chromebook as well, which is quite handy if you wanted to. Again, you probably see this on other Android operating systems, but just to highlight that this is also an option. With the display, you have the light and dark mode. You can schedule your dark mode, and with your brightness level you can set it to automatic brightness, and also you can set a sunlight mode and a night mode. You also have a reading mode and a color scheme. So color scheme you can set to more hot and cold or saturated standard, like the temperature or whatever color you prefer with your display you can set down here. I just put it onto default. It's not really something I'm particularly concerned about. And also the refresh rate is 120 Hz. I don't know if you're going to see this given that this is being filmed at 25 frames per second, but if I put it to 60, the ability or the smoothness of the transition of the screen going up to down is certainly not as nice or as pleasant a user experience as if I was to use the 120 Hz option, which is definitely smoother, and I don't think you can see this because of the frame rate that I'm using. Even if you're using 60 frames per second, you probably wouldn't be able to pick up on this, but trust me, it's great. And then just like any other phone, you're going to have your sound settings. You can set different sounds for different types of events, and you can also download or make use of existing ones that exist with this particular skin. With the home screen, you have the option to have the app drawer when you swipe up, which I personally prefer, or you can just have it as classic, which does nothing. And there's many other configurable items which I'm sure you'll see on other Android phones. Passwords and security, you can set up to 5 fingerprint passwords in this device. Battery and performance, you can see how your battery's been performing, and there's an ultra battery saver option, which was not an option when I had my Google Pixel. Everything else I don't think I need to comment about. As you can see, it's quite a slick, smooth, typical Android skin. It looks very similar to what I had on my Google Pixel, but the main thing I wanted to comment on was the camera and its performance. When it comes to the camera, you have the photo mode, which makes use of the wide angle lens, or if you choose 0.6, it makes use of the ultra wide angle lens. You have a portrait mode which uses algorithms, which I'll touch on in a moment, and essentially blurs out the background, and I'll show you how effective this actually is in a moment. And also what I quite liked here was the Pro mode. If you're not quite getting the shots that you wanted, you have the Pro mode, which enables you to select the lens as either wide, ultra wide or macro, and then you can also set your ISO, your EV setting, your shutter speed, and also like essentially what is the F number of the camera by going from macro to landscape. White balance also you can set as auto, or you have 4 other presets to accommodate the environment you're taking a picture in. So I thought this was all quite nice. Additionally, you have filters which you can add, which are quite fun, which I will touch on later. But I'm generally quite impressed with the camera setup that comes from this phone, given its price. If you click on more, there's many other options like night mode, which we will look at later, which to be honest is not actually that great. 180 megapixel mode, which is the native sensor resolution of the main wide sensor. If you use the 108 mode, all it's doing is taking a picture at 108 megapixels and then binning 9 to make 1. So binning 9 pixels to make 1. So it will downsize the 108 to 12 megapixels. And actually it's not making too much of a difference, as we'll see later. You also have panorama, slow motion, time-lapse, dual video, and really I haven't messed about too much with long exposure or clone, but there will be other videos that talk about this. I'm not particularly concerned about these. I just wanted to gauge what the initial impressions were of the native sensor and its performance. So let's get into the camera, shall we? I'm quite fussy about cameras on phones, hence I was quite distraught when my Google Pixel stopped working, especially considering it's so difficult to get hold of one brand new in this country. However, as I'm about to explain, this really is not a bad performer, not in all aspects, but there are certain ones it really shines. So first I'd like to comment on the video. Generally I'm not that impressed by the video, but it's usable. Unfortunately, stabilization is only available at 1080 at 30 frames per second. There is no stabilization in any other mode. So I will show you right now 1080 at 30 frames per second. So this is 1080 at 30. .1080 at 60 frames per second. This is 1080 at 60. .4K at 30 frames per second. This is 4K at 30. And then 1080 at 30 frames per second stabilized. So here's a different shot with stabilization activated at 1080 30 frames per second. And as you can see, it's much better. So the stabilization definitely makes a big difference, but to be honest, I don't think the video is so much of a selling point on this camera. It's good enough, but it's not what I want to brag about when it comes to this camera. For me, what I'm really impressed by is its natural ability to capture depth of field. As you can see in this picture right here, this is not an AI enabled depth of field. This is not using some fancy portrait mode or some AI enabled portrait mode. This is purely from the size of the sensor and quality of the lens. And you can see it's picked up all the details of the bubbles quite nicely on here without too much noise in the background. It's a beautiful natural bokeh effect. And then similarly here with my hand, you can see it perfectly in focus and everything is quite nicely blurred in the background without too much distortion or pixelation. So for me, this is a real selling point of this camera. This is what makes the difference. And then additionally, it's macro mode. If you use the macro mode as is in the photo mode, basically if you don't use the pro mode to try and use macro and you just use the ultra macro mode in the phone, you can get some really nice detailed shots that come natively out the phone, and it uses some AI to try and get a fairly sharp image at such a close proximity to your subject. Generally, if you're using the wide camera, the pictures are pretty good. The colors are very representative of what I was seeing with my own eyes. The only comment I would make was the sharpening and post-processing afterwards. I think I shot this in 108 megapixel mode and the sharpening is, to my eye, quite obvious. It's not ruining the picture, but I can pick up on it. One thing I wanted to mention was the difference between the 108 megapixel mode and the standard photo mode. The 108 megapixel mode, as I mentioned before, just takes 9 pixels and averages them into 1. So it bins 9 and keeps 1 based on an averaging algorithm. And you can see this averaging algorithm kind of makes the yellows here a little less punchy. It makes the wording here a little less punchy. I think just using the natural native photo mode rather than using the 108 megapixel mode is better. So I don't know actually if there's any need to use the 108 megapixel mode, because effectively you're getting 12 megapixels regardless of which mode you use, and actually the native mode that doesn't do the pixel binning turns out with a slightly punchier image. When it comes to portrait mode, I'm actually fairly satisfied with the camera. When you make use of the HDR algorithm, it does a good job of exposing the darker regions of the photo, so this half of my face, and also not overexposing the background.
I did notice, however, when I used the AI mode with the HDR mode, it didn't quite do the job properly. But nonetheless, if you're not looking for a bokeh or portrait mode effect, I think this is pretty decent. The problem comes when you do use the portrait mode effect, and if you make too aggressive a selection of the F number. The F number is something you can customize in portrait mode, so that determines how blurry or focused your background is. If you make it very blurry, then artifacts like this along the edge of my face are going to become quite obvious. Whereas if you didn't blur the background so much, it wouldn't be so much of a big deal. But for me, I can notice this and I'm not entirely happy with this image. Same again, has a problem with this side of my face. But generally, if you don't use portrait mode, I am very happy with the images that come out of the front-facing camera. I think they look great. And if you want the bokeh effect for anything other than selfies, it's fantastic. It won't be using the technology to force that blur in the background. It will just be using the natural hardware of the camera and sensor to enable that to happen. One last point I thought I would mention is I don't think that Xiaomi has managed to develop their night shooting algorithm quite as well as Google. So when you try to shoot in night mode, there's a 2-second delay after you press the shutter, and then it tells you to wait for another 2 seconds. And the algorithm just isn't up to scratch. Everything is completely out of focus, it's blurry, and it's really not a shining point of the phone, hence why I went dull on it. The strong points of this phone are in daytime, for depth of field, and for general pictures. And for the price of this phone and the range that it's sitting at, I think it's fantastic. But I don't think you can count on it for a large variety of different environments that you want to take pictures in. But for depth of field and daytime, if that's what you're mainly going to be using it for, then you're not going to have any problems at all. So here's another shot just showing off that butteriness. And also there's a tilt shift mode which kind of blurs certain portions of the photo to kind of make it look like a micro Lego land. And there's a lot of fun features and filters you can use with this camera. So you can make your pictures have various effects, which I personally don't think I'll be using too much, but there are other different color tones you can use, like this, which is a little bit more warmer in tone, which I certainly think would be quite useful if you're trying to tell a particular story. But generally, I think it's a fantastic camera for something you would generally need a DSLR to achieve for daytime and depth of field shots.
So pretty much the only other thing I wanted to comment on here is that this comes with a screen protector already adhesed to the surface of the phone. For me personally, I don't like sticking things to the screen. I'd much rather have a robust screen that can resist scratches than putting plastic on top of it. It's just a less premium experience. And around this notch here for the camera, it's harder to clean because it's slightly recessed below the surface of the plastic coating, but it's okay. This is what comes as standard with the phone. I understand that this protects the screen, but it's just not something I've ever signed up to. I've never bought a phone and put a screen protector on it. It actually really makes me cringe. But anyway, I hope this review has been useful. So far as my in-between phone until I can get hold of the maybe Google Pixel 6, which will come out next month, depending on its specs, this is such a great in-between phone. I have such a great feeling about this phone. There's so many things you can do with it. It's a lot of fun. And for daytime exposure, depth of field, natural depth of field photographs, it's amazing. Like there is no mid-range phone I know of that can do this, that is also very capable and packed with all these other features. So I hope you found this useful. If you like this video, guys, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of these videos with other phones that I review, please subscribe to this channel. And until the next time, good luck with finding your next phone, and I hope this has been incredibly useful.